Ponds and basins can be found using aerial imagery and common pond indicators such as standing water, like this, or structures such as outlets and other visual aids, such as using a hillshade or a contour line file. So today I'm using ArcGIS Pro. You can use Google Earth to find these things, to find these ponds, or you can also use other GIS, any version of ArcGIS, or any free GIS that you have access to. We need to understand that there are a few different types of ponds. So we have wet basins and dry basins. Wet basins, also known as retention basins, have water in them all the time. They have a permanent pool, which is, as it sounds, is permanent. So it's always there, and then they have an additional volume of storage on top of that permanent volume. And then dry basins, which are also known as detention basins, do not have water in them. See, this is a detention basin right here. And we'll get into how you can identify that, but see, it's here, it's a structure, it's made for holding water. You can see these are like the input pipes, but there's no water in it right now. There's only water in it when it's detaining stormwater. And today we will be using the Headwaters West Branch Rocky Creek Hawk 12 as an example for finding ponds. So let's go. So first we'll use the presence of water to help us identify ponds. So as you can see, anywhere where there's standing water, that is pretty clearly a pond. So what I'm going to do is I have a point file already made, and if you're using Google Earth, you can just add a place mark in there, and I'm just going to start marking ponds where I see the presence of water. So let's stay within our boundaries. So here's a pond, here, 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 here. Here, do you see I'm just looking for standing water wherever I can see it? I am placing a point to represent a pond so that we have all of those captured for our analysis later. Also, I do want to point out, this is just a personal thing that I just find like a safe thing to do. This pond is sort of partly within our boundary and partly without. And I'm going to go ahead and just mark that just in case, like, according to the contours, it, the drainage area of the pond does go this way. And if it ends up not according to the contours, we can just delete this point later so that it doesn't get included in our analysis. All right, so I've just gone through the whole huck and found all of the ponds that are evident with just the presence of water. This probably took me 20 minutes maybe. And so now what we're going to do is look for ponds using other visual markers besides just the presence of water, such as vegetation, just differences in vegetation. We're going to look out for areas that are darker or denser or brown, or maybe like super grassy, and that can hint to the presence of ponds. So let's look at a few examples. So here's one right here. You see, so there's no water in this. And, if you were just looking for water, standing water, you wouldn't be able to see that this is a pond. But as you can see, there's just this area right here. You can kind of see more around it. And it looks different from the obviously mode graphs that's around it at this office building. So that right there, this change in vegetation, hints to me that there is a pond. So what I am going to do, I'm going to go ahead and turn on the contours, and we can see all of these closed contours. And so sometimes when you have closed contours, they can be like a hill, or they can be like a depression. And in this case, if you look at the numbers of the contours, this is the elevation. It is going down, so this is in fact a pond. So let's go ahead. There it is. And also this right here, you can see, just this oblong shape that, is different, a little more brown than everything mowed around it. So let's look at it. Also this right here. So turn on our contours. And you can see there's all these closed contours right here. There's also closed contours here and here. So when they load, so you can see these are increasing in value. So this right here is some sort of hill or mound. But then these two groupings of closed contours are in fact depressions. So let's go ahead and mark them as ponds. And then this as well is another example of just vegetation kind of hinting to the presence of ponds. Here it is. See, like a little channel going through. We're in a subdivision, which, typically will have some sort of stormwater control if it's, relatively new. So let's check it out. So as you can see, this is a depressed area, which we have identified as our pond. Okay, and the next way we are going to identify ponds or basins is by looking for structures that are typically found in ponds. So we have things such as inlet and outlet structures, which could be a box or some sort of culvert, or you might be able to see like a pipe or some sort of something like that, like sticking out from the ground, or you could see it pretty clearly from the aerial imagery, or you could see something called the trickle channel, which that just helps low flow get from the input to the output of the pond. Actually, I'm not really sure which way this one goes, but this right here is the trickle channel. So if you see something like this, is a pond right here. So yeah, let's look at another example. Look at some outlets. Yeah, see, this is this right here, and this right here. Probably this right here is also like some sort of inlet and outlet structure. Oops. So some sort of inlet and outlet structure. But you can also see the trickle channels. See how there's one coming from this inlet, and even these smaller ones, and then connects it all, so then the low flow can exit the pond when it needs to. So let's go ahead, identify that as a pond. And so I used contours a bit earlier just to verify groups of vegetation that we saw were indeed ponds, but I do want to reiterate that contours are super duper helpful when identifying ponds. So, and you can find contour shape files pretty easily. You can look at the Department of Natural Resources or Department of Transportation, or any sort of municipalities, like GIS portals or websites, and more often than not, they do have some sort of publicly available GIS file that has contours, or you can also generate your own contours, using GIS and some sort of DEM, digital elevation model. I know that OGRIP has really nice LiDAR-derived DEMs, and you can download it for the whole state of Ohio. And that's what I did. I am using this contour file right here that I derived from an OGRIP DEM. So let's go ahead, turn it on. It's pretty detailed, so it does take a while to load. And yeah, there it is. It's a nice depression. That is our pond, and as you can see, the depression, its footprint is much larger than just that patch of vegetation right there. So that is a pretty good example of how contours can, just help, your eye, because when I look at this without the contours, I just see this little brown spot right here, and I would call that the pond, if I were tracing the footprint of the pond. But as you can see, the contours make it much, much larger, so pretty good thing to be able to see. Maybe a school, an elementary school, or community center or something like that. And we have a few groups of closed contours, so, which one could it be? We'll find out. So let's have a closer look at these groups of closed contours. The contours show right here. You see it, there's this depression coming right off of the parking lot here. So the assumption that I would make is that this is a pond, which you can also kind of see a trickle channel right here, and of course our vegetation that is different from the surrounding vegetation. So this pond most likely, drains the building and the parking lot. So let's pan up to these, and as you can see, they are actually hills. They are elevated. They go up in elevation, so these are not ponds. It's another good example of why contours can be really helpful, especially having the elevation turned on, which you can just do in labeling. It helps you see that, maybe it's a mound, maybe it's a pond, and this, just verifies it one way or the other. Okay, and something else that I do want to, call to attention is the use of the hillshade. And so just like the contour file, hillshades are derived from digital elevation models, DEM. So I have this hillshade file right here that I also generated using GIS from the OGRIP DEM, the same one that I used to generate the contour file. And so what hillshades are, it is a 2D representation of the texture of the terrain. So I will turn it on really quickly so that you can see what I'm talking about. Okay. So as you can see, we already had this pond right here identified because of water. But then when you look, you can clearly make out these depressions right here. So, hey, we just found two ponds using the hillshade. So let's go ahead and click on them. Here is another place that I think that hillshade would be pretty helpful for identifying ponds. Let's turn it on. There it is, clear as day. As you can see, pond right there, and it can really just improve your identification of them. I want to look at this place because when I was panning through, I thought that perhaps this was a pond. Maybe this was also a pond, and honestly, maybe this. So let's use our hillshade to figure it out. This is not a pond. As you can see, there is no clear depression right here, and this actually surprises me because this doesn't appear to be a pond either, and I was actually pretty certain that this was going to be a pond, so I don't know. I also contours as well, which, yeah, so as you can see, the contours are just showing some sloped terrain. This appears to be some little channel. So apparently this location does not have a pond. So these tools, contours and hillshade, can also be helpful for ruling out potential ponds that you find that turn out to not be ponds at all. Something else that is pretty helpful as well is using our streamlines to find ponds as well. So typically, as you can see, we have outlined ponds in this Ohio Hydro Lines shapefile that I am using. And a lot of these are wet basins that I have already identified, but I do see right here, if I zoom in, a pond that I have not identified. So let's go ahead and do that. So as you can see, the streamlines and then the outline ponds, that can really help. Oh, here is another one that I did not identify in our earlier pass-through. So here it is, that helps. You see the streamlines and then the closed lines, and then it keeps going. Really helps, call attention to the pond that might be there. And in this case, it's pretty clearly there. And I do want to mention things like this where, I look at this and I don't clearly see a pond. There are a lot of trees in this area, but I don't know, there might be something there because the stream file has these two closed lines. So let's look at it. Yeah, it looks like there is. If you can see that right there. I'm definitely going to do this one. And I'm not sure about this one. I do want to turn on the contours and see what happens. So as you can see, neither of these, potential ponds have actual closed contours. Let's let the contours catch up. Loading. Don't, but this is something, so I am going to include it, so you can kind of make out some depression. But this right here has no closed contours, and it just kind of looks like, water just flows down in here and then into the stream. So I'm not going to include this, but I will include this one and see what comes of it in our analysis. Another helpful tip for identifying basins is to be aware of the land use of the watershed that you're working in. So typically, stormwater ponds and basins will be more concentrated in areas where there is development. So if we are to, zoom in to this subdivision was built and developed, and it has ponds such as these that were built along with them to treat the stormwater runoff that this development and the streets cause. So if we are to sort of treat that as a rule, more ponds, more stormwater ponds, dry basins and wet basins will be concentrated in more developed areas, which is, any sort of subdivision, maybe even shopping center or, industrial area. We have some warehouses. This used to be some distribution center for, the railroad. This stormwater ponds will tend to be more distributed in those areas. Unlike rural areas, which tend to have more ponds that aren't necessarily built for stormwater, such as, ponds in someone's yard or things, or ponds and basins used for livestock or perhaps fishing or aesthetic value. So just if you ever want to decide on a place to start when you are identifying ponds within any sort of watershed that you're working in, I definitely suggest starting out in more developed areas and then just going through, because the developed areas are where you'll find most of your stormwater basins.